Following months of power blackouts, Eskom announced on Monday that 800 megawatts was added to the grid after Unit 1 at the Kusile power station was returned to service, a month and a half ahead of schedule. Despite the efforts to turn the fortunes of the power utility, however, escalating debt poses a threat to its survival and operational capacity. Good evening, welcome to Unfiltered. I'm Sizwe Mpofu Walsh. One of the main debtors is municipalities, which owe 64 billion rands to Eskom. In May this year, the National Treasury announced the Eskom Municipal Debt Relief Support Program to address this problem. But 5 months ago, only 38 out of 257 municipalities had applied for the intervention, which comes to an end this month. So tonight we ask, how does Eskom's municipal debt impact on service delivery? And joining me for this discussion are Ms. Thembi Nkadimeng, Minister of the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Eskom's National Spokesperson, Ms. Daphne Mukwena, and often litigating on behalf of hundreds of residents at the receiving end of a challenged Eskom and incapacitated municipalities, is public law attorney Chantal Gladwin-Wood. Let's watch this insert produced by Andrew Mokhatle for some more context.
The unexpected resignation of Board Chair Mpomakwana last week has triggered questions about leadership challenges at Eskom. The shortest-serving Eskom chair to date, he is set to step down at the annual general meeting scheduled for the end of October. Makwana's departure comes just under 10 months after Andre de Ruyter resigned as Group Chief Executive in December. What is top of mind for most in the country is the current state of Eskom's finances. Experts say one of the biggest impediments towards the power utility's financial stability is the money owed to it by state organs, consumers, and municipalities. Last week, Minister of Electricity Kusile said towns and cities owed the power utility 64 billion rand and that the debt continues to grow. Earlier reports indicated that the city of Tshwane and Ekurule's debt stood at 4.7 billion.
Municipalities are going to become an area of focus. If you like, is an albatross. The issues around the payment levels, the issues of illegal connections, placing significant amount of strain on the distribution infrastructure, because in many instances it exceeds, if you like, the maximum capacity of that distribution infrastructure.
In May, Treasury launched an initiative to allow municipalities to have their debt written off systematically over 3 years. Part of the qualification criteria is for these entities to comply with 14 financial management requirements, including keeping up with the current account payments to Eskom. Last week, National Treasury announced that of the country's 257 municipalities, 136 owed 58.5 billion in arrears by 31 March 2023. As of 22nd September, 37 municipalities had applied for the relief support program, with 28 approved and 9 of them still being assessed.
Part of the requirements is that first, municipalities need to address the issues of illegal connections, and then secondly is to ensure that the municipalities or households rather commit themselves to allowing that we have a prepaid meter system, a dispensation of a prepaid meter system, and then thirdly is that they have to be diligent payers over a period measures consecutively over 12 months, and if that happens, then they are into consideration for a write-off.
Officials at Eskom say failure to clamp down on defaulting municipalities when the challenge started is the root cause of the problem. The electricity minister says failure to service electricity debt by municipalities across the country impacts Eskom's operations as it inhibits its ability to invest in maintaining its plants and expanding the power grid. During his budget speech address earlier this year, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana raised concerns about what he calls non-payment culture.
More generally, the culture of non-payment, not only by municipalities, but all organs of state and individual household customers, is concerning. Such a behavior undermines and cripples our institutions and makes it impossible for them to deliver services.
It is important to note that by 31st March 2015, Eskom municipal area debt stood at 5 billion rand. With more than half of the 257 municipalities having defaulted on their Eskom bills, focus is on the accounting departments including cooperative governance and traditional affairs. With service delivery often resulting in community protests, it remains to be seen if defaulting municipalities can turn their financial fortunes around. Meanwhile, the Eskom Municipal Debt Relief Support Program has been extended to 31st October 2023. Andrew Mukhatle, Unfiltered, SABC News.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. Minister, could I begin with you? Minister Ramokgopa, your colleague, says that the failure of municipalities to pay Eskom is becoming an albatross around government's capacity to continue to keep the lights on. What do you think is behind the cause of this massive debt, and particularly the growth in this debt over the last year, where it's been growing by nearly 5 billion rand now?
Thank you very much, Sizu, and good evening to our viewers. Yes, I think it is quite a big challenge for Eskom, but not only for Eskom, but also to our communities who are compelled by law to give a service to. And primarily a service that needs to be sustainable over the years. It's a multifaceted problem. One, it has got to do with the tariff setting, which is part of the issues which ourselves and National Treasury, the relationship between the billing and the valuation role and the size of a house, whether a stand is vacant or there is a house. And then you move to issues like illegal connections, which are very massive. And then the growth of the economy and the high levels of unemployment are found in the municipal space, where a service, whether you disconnect it, it gets to be received in an illegal manner. But also, you also talk about theft of the infrastructure, which is very high, not only emanating from cuts or systems or challenges that emanate from load shedding, but generally the destruction of infrastructure, which is even becoming a norm and acceptable in society, to see a person carrying a robot and removing the wires. It may sound like a small thing, but if it's in almost all the areas, it does go to that. But secondly, the largest part, which is often what is not said, and it's proven by the Auditor General. In the last year of Kimi Makwetu, we requested an assessment of all the 257 municipalities, and it was discovered that 60% of that debt is irrecoverable. And that's what actually led to the rebate process. Because at the amalgamation of municipalities from the TLCs, you moved a debt which is still sitting now. Eguruleni, for example, is Entwane. They are one of the major defaulters in the top 20. Actually, the top 20 funny accounts to around 57 billion. Only 20 municipalities. So what does this suggest? It means then the small city of Jimistin, Springs, and then in this Eguruleni context, when they were amalgamated, they carried the debt and put them into one, clubbed them into one lump sum. It had been occasionally in the past easy for metros, relatively, because the market, the economic base is open, they could be able to collect and whatever. And then there's been negativity into the economy, COVID, unemployment and all that, which led to people being unable to. But the impact of migration, which says people who are saying they are moving into the country, but they're landing in a ward. And in a ward, they're demanding the services. So next time you're going to call me, actually, we'll be talking about the water bill. which Rand Water, Bloom Water, and
you
whoever.
available next week?
Well, what will I do? It's my responsibility to come and
just
offer answers.
Can I just take you up on some of what you've already said there? Because should government have woken up to this earlier, even at the national level, and perhaps intervened with more rigor? I appreciate this happens at the municipal level, but we've known for a long time that this debt is massive. But for us to allow it to grow to such an extent over a year suggests that maybe there hasn't been the appropriate urgency from the national level to intervene where the problem is particularly acute.
Remember, electricity provision is scheduled. There's a portion that is scheduled to municipalities, which is mostly reticulation, and a portion that is scheduled to Eskom for bulk. The challenge here had always been at the inception of local government. Here, to a certain extent, you could say you are correct. The premise is 90% besides grants needs to come from communities and residents, business and everybody else who resides in that particular municipality. And the fact of the matter is, the policy then designed free basic services to say, you are an old person, you are incapacitated for whatever, you get a means test to be assessed and be able to afford or to be given a free service, hence it's called free basic services. But the reality is that the municipalities have been unable, one, to collect at 90%. You can collect in Eguruleni, you're not going to be able to collect in Mkanduli. But two, even the measures of those, because it's on the basis of equitable share, which does not necessarily give you the entire amount for the actual population that physically is there. Stats SA says we grew about 4 million in advance than what they were anticipating as a country will grow. Where are all those people? Where are they getting the service from? And then lastly, yes, it will be our own weaknesses as municipalities in terms of systems, in terms of ensuring that we put correct tariffs, in terms of ensuring that we collect, and we put measures where there are such needs. But you find a situation now that the free basic budget, free basic services budget, than a collection, there's a distinction.
Right.
There are more people who need to be subsidized by municipality for a free service, which they still draw more and are unable to pay, and there are more people who are connected into the system. Right. And then there are losses that the system also incurs.
Indeed. Let me bring in the Eskom spokesperson, Ms. Mukwena. What's your view of what has caused this crisis, and do you agree or disagree with the assessment of the minister?
Yeah, and good evening to the minister and your other guests, and good evening to your listeners. Yes, some of the issues, yes, that we can concur with, you know, especially with the non-technical losses, where obviously as Eskom as well, we are experiencing communities or our customers bypassing their meters. And obviously then it becomes a challenge to collect as well. However, there are, you know, municipalities that we know for a fact that their collection rate, you know, has been ranging beyond your 80% and 90%, but still continue to default in terms of paying their electricity bill. And one of the main reasons, I think, that, you know, with our engagements with municipalities, as we have been trying to, you know, work with them and see how we can assist as Eskom as well to actually ensure that they pay us. One of the main things is that they haven't ring-fenced their financial statements in terms of their electricity business, and obviously in contravention of the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act. Obviously that leading to when they collect what is basically from their customers, which is or electricity related bills, they then use that money to pay for other stuff or whatever they would have prioritized as a municipality. Yeah, we've tried a lot of obviously strategies that we have put in place to actually work with some of the municipalities and ensure that, we assist them in ensuring that they, collect where obviously we are seeing that they are low-hanging fruits. But obviously through what we call the active partnering program. But most of the municipalities, obviously, we just failed along the way or even not interested.
Could I ask you, Ms. Mokoena, on that? Which municipalities are maybe success stories and which ones are a particular challenge still?
Yeah, we've got in the KZN municipalities that we have worked with that we have succeeded in the active partnering. But when you come to Gauteng, for example, in Mfuleni, I think we have tried, and obviously we failed with the municipality in terms of getting that active partnering on the ground and ensuring that, we assist them, and especially with Mfuleni, and I'm citing Mfuleni because Mfuleni, we knew that their collection rate in actual fact was very high. And yes, we did have some COVID issues, and I think with the mayors, we tried to work, especially in Gauteng, tried to work with the MECs and the mayors to try and see how we close that gap that was cited due to COVID issues, but obviously the issues were even before COVID, and obviously after COVID they just exacerbated.
Let me bring in Ms. Gladwin Wood here, because at the end of the day, between government and Eskom, ultimately it's the citizen who experiences a cut in services, and we're getting it both because Eskom can't provide it, and then when it can provide it, the municipality can't pay for it, so you still don't get it. To what extent do you think citizens have a legal recourse in this environment of default and municipalities being unable to pay Eskom or service their debt appropriately?
I think it's a multifaceted problem, as my colleague pointed out. We don't live in a perfect socio-economic condition, and we have had a rough ride over the last couple of years, and that has certainly exacerbated the problem from the perspective that municipalities have to provide services and they only have so many resources to do so with a growing number of people to service. So I don't think all the blame can rest on the municipalities. But I do think that we have a situation in South Africa where we have a bit of a culture of non-accountability and we have a culture of non-payment. And I think that the two of those elements combine, right from the bottom of the grassroots levels of our society, for example, people stealing electricity, right up to the top, where you have municipal managers, for example, who have jobs, but they don't have the degrees for them. And when we talk about the Auditor General and the unqualified or the qualified reports, you can see, and it's been evident, not just for the last 5 years, but for the last 10, 15 years, that the debt to Eskom has been escalating. And everybody who works in the electricity industry knows that electricity prescribes after 3 years. So what that means is that it's only a debt that you can collect legally for 3 years. Now, if your municipalities aren't doing their job collecting their debt, they're going to have a problem because they're not going to be able to pay their providers, not just Eskom, but all of their providers. So the non-accountability, and the accountability should rest with the top echelons of the municipality. But unfortunately, that's not the way that it works in the world that we live in today, and I think that's a problem. So between the non-accountability and the non-payment culture, we've ended ourselves in this mess.
Let's continue this conversation. After the break, we're looking at the debt that is owed to Eskom from another part of the government, municipalities, and the effect that this has on not only the health of government finances, but also the extent to which we experience electricity. Don't go anywhere, we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. How does a municipality failing to pay Eskom affect you at home and your ability to experience electricity, even if Eskom can at the time provide that electricity technically? That's the question we're asking tonight. Minister Nkadimeng, could I come to you? Because one of the solutions or short-term solutions proposed to this problem has been a debt relief program. So effectively, municipalities can write off a certain amount of debt, but they have to follow certain conditions set by the Treasury. Now, some suggest that those conditions are quite harsh. So we're between a rock and a hard place here. On the one hand, the municipalities can get their debt squashed, as it were, but then they have to meet these very harsh conditions which can lead to serious penalties on those municipalities. Where do you stand on these conditions that have been set by Treasury?
Well, our responsibility, amongst others, besides the supervision of municipalities, cooperative governance, intergovernmental relation frameworks to bring all the parties into the table and be able to discuss. So one of our key measure stakeholders, which is the municipality in this instance, is the one that is facing the issues here. And we had a MINMEC and we invited National Treasury. I think it could be 2 or so weeks ago, which led to the request by us, COCTA, on behalf of municipalities for an extension. Remember, the cutoff date was 30th September. We requested for a cutoff date to 30th October to go at least the identified municipalities that we know have a challenge while we are discussing the measures and terms. For example, it's a 3-year package where you have to meet certain, yes, you can agree to put on a meter. We all know we have challenges of bypassing. I haven't come across a mayor who will say, I don't want to pay to put meters because I don't want to collect. You will tick that to a box relatively easy, but you still have quite a lot to do as a municipality. If you default when you do not have control of even government in some instances not paying municipalities, state-owned enterprises not paying household, 15 billion of that 64 billion, it's interest, for example, right? So there are measures in which even this write-off could begin from ourselves as government to say, look, it does not have to put interest on a debt that is not being serviced because there are difficulties. We agree to a certain extent with the assessment that there are municipalities which meet the threshold, and we could put, in terms of collection, and we could put a percentage of ring fencing and pay for what we are consuming, even if because that directly comes from the payers, whether it's business or including household. But to say I don't meet the measure, being a municipality, and that could lead to the license for provision of energy withdrawn, it's taking it too far. And this is what is making municipalities doubtful to say, we have got challenges of unemployment, they are real. We have got challenges. Because for me, the argument of non-accountability, yes, I get it. I'm yet to see a case that has been sent to me and I don't attend to it. We have formed a local government accountability forum. We have pulled the MPA, SIU. Currently, we have gone through all the forensic of municipalities. We have picked up 849 transgressions, handed some back to the AG for the Public Audit Amendment Act, to the Hawks, and for all the investigation. So we could cover the accountability space. But would we be able, in a day, in a go, to deal with part 2, which is encouraging people to pay, user pay principle? Then you say, we assume that in 36 months, everybody will be born again, they will be paying this municipality, and nobody will be defaulting. You could avoid having your license withdrawn. I think it's taking it a bit too far.
Do you think
Do
you think Treasury went too far with the conditions it imposed?
Yes, hence we sat on the table. Remember, ourselves who are government, and I'm saying the responsibility I carry is to lead cooperative governance and bring all the stakeholders. One stakeholder says to me, we don't think this is practical. I listen, and the other stakeholder said, yes, we might have overlooked.
Right.
We're back, we've formed a team, we're looking into extension, we're assessing together.
Can I just ask you, Ms. Gladwin-Wood, as well? One of the provisions within this debt relief program and the conditions imposed by Treasury, 6.6.2, is that the municipalities must also show that they are cutting off services to consumers who aren't paying unless they're indigent consumers. That seems quite draconian as well to me. I mean, I think we all want to make sure people are paying, but for government to now go to Treasury and show that they are cutting off services, can you talk us through some of the legalities of cutting off and what that might mean?
So I think the starting point here is that in terms of our constitution and all of the national legislation that governs not only electricity but water and all the other services that municipalities are meant to provide, they have a duty to provide those, but they need the resources to do so. And so there's also an obligation on the consumer at the end to pay for them. Now, when it comes to cutting off of services, our law empowers municipalities to cut off any service, so electricity or water, whether you haven't paid your rates, your refuse, your sewer, and it's a good rule. But it's subject to some very careful administrative provisions which ensure that when the cutoff happens, it's done fairly and that it's only done almost, I would say, as a last resort. So there are letters of demand and opportunities to make debt arrangements and all sorts of other things that happen first. So provided that a municipality is following those rules, consumers are given a fair opportunity to pay. If they are not paying and if they are not indigent, and also if they don't have a dispute, because you do get instances where there's an incorrect bill, right? So we're not talking about those. We're talking about a situation where there's a consumer, they have consumed the services, but they're simply not paying. Those people don't deserve, at the expense of our national government, of Eskom, which is there to provide services to the entire South Africa, to keep receiving a service for free.
But do you think we need Treasury to tell municipalities to do that? Because that's a different legal question.
Well, they should be doing it anyway.
Right.
Firstly,
Right. Sure.
And that comes back to the accountability question. You know, if we had a bit more accountability for the person whose job it is to say, my collections should be at 95%, but they're sitting at 80%, and of that 80%, perhaps 10% of it actually is irrecoverable, it has to be written off because it's prescribed. If we had a bit more transparency in that element, we would go a long way towards being able to have more resources to pay Eskom.
Ms. Mokoena, what are your thoughts? I'm assuming Eskom is right behind Treasury on just trying to get a bit more urgency and, you know, make the stakes a bit higher for municipalities who are defaulting or not making these payments.
Yeah, look, we welcome, obviously, any other assistance that we could get to actually ensure that, you know, the municipalities get that assistance to, at the end of the day, where the journey that we have, you know, embarked on with the municipalities since, you know, this problem really has been a very painful one because, as you would have seen that, I mean, in the 9 years, our overdue or the municipality overdue debt grew by about 55 billion. And every time, obviously, we try to engage with the municipalities to say, fine, we understand your issues. Can we get into some payment arrangement? Because we've offered those to the municipality to say, fine, let's get into some form of payment arrangement, but ensure that you pay your current account, you know, religiously so. But yeah, and then some municipalities, yes, there are success stories, but obviously most of the municipalities, given the amount, obviously we landed with the overdue debt that we are seeing today. I mean, the top 10 municipalities that are owing us, as I speak to you today, they owe us about 40 billion. And Emalahleni municipality, you know, leading the pack. So, and not that we haven't engaged these municipalities, there's litigation that we end up taking each other to courts, which for me obviously doesn't help, or as Eskom it doesn't help, because at the end of the day, we don't even have that money to be paying, you know, the law firms to be taking each other to court, because people don't just at times not want to pay us. But so we welcome the assistance, and hopefully the municipalities will comply with the conditions that National Treasury have put forward and ensure that their current account is paid on time when it's due, because that for us it means that it will improve our cash flow.
Indeed, and we'll continue the conversation after the break. We're talking about the health, the financial health of Eskom and how it's related to the financial health of municipalities who ultimately have to pay Eskom for those services. So this is a question that's about municipal finances, which is a fancy way of saying it's a question about whether the lights stay on, even if Eskom improves its generation capacity. Stick with us, we'll delve more into this conversation after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. To keep the lights on, of course, Eskom has to improve its generation capacity, but it also has to be in a financial position in order to ensure that we can get back on the road to a more healthy electricity situation in South Africa. And so tonight we're talking about essentially the financial health of Eskom and how that bears on the question of us being able to experience electricity as citizens. Now, Ms. Mokoena, before we went to the break, you were zeroing in on certain areas and places that have been particularly problematic. I just had a look, and it seems that there's a disproportionate share that some very bad municipalities are taking up a huge share of this debt. So Maluti Apofung, I think, has something like 7 billion of this debt alone. As you mentioned, Emalahleni, Mfuleni, Govan Mbeki in Mpumalanga. So it seems like we have certain very serious cases that if we can resolve those particular cases, then we go a disproportionate way to resolving the debt problem overall.
Yeah, as I said, that about 10 municipalities contribute to the 40 billion debt. And I must say that we've got 109 municipalities that don't owe us. I mean, that's obviously a good story to tell.
Sure.
And obviously then you then ask yourself, what is it that is different that these municipalities are doing and these other ones are not doing that actually ends up with the municipality owing us that huge money? And as you mentioned, you know, that obviously we have to generate, transmit and distribute this electricity. It's not for free. At the end of the day, it's very disheartening that as Eskom, we have to, supply that electricity, make sure that the municipality receive this electricity so that their customers are happy at the end of the day. But it comes obviously with Eskom having to actually borrow money to actually ensure that we actually make sure that these municipalities that are owing us the electricity, because at the end of the day, with our litigation, I'm sure we've been on the news where we've tried to disconnect some municipalities or terminate supply. Obviously, we're interdicted or whatever stopped us from, because we have to follow the process, the PAJA process as well. But all those interventions that we have tried, obviously not bearing any fruits or just meant that as Eskom, we have to bear the brunt of the increased lending rate and just subsidize these municipalities at our expense.
Right. And let me put that to the Minister, because Minister, you have a view of all these different municipalities. Take us into where things are not working in particular.
Well, we've zoomed closely into this 57 billion that I indicated. It actually expands a bit further from the 10 that Ms. Mokoena is talking to. It has taken it to about 20. So you've got about provinces like Mpumalanga, Gauteng, Free State, Northwest, having about 5 or 4 within the 20, the Maluti and those.
Right.
But there are other mechanisms that we are using to assist municipalities so that they could be able to ring fence more. For example, Machabeng, I think, is the second owing municipality. We got into partnership with the mines in Sibanye to provide the water services. Because if you track on their finances, much as yes, there would have been areas where we want them to account properly for the proper utilization of the funds that they had in the previous years, but you realize that there's very little income because there has been no infrastructure. Most of it has been lost through theft, and they are part of the applicants of the 37. And we have others now replacing the service of giving water and sanitation, you will ring fence that and pay what they are getting and what they are able to save from equitable share and other things to pay. Government is one of the highest in Mpumalanga. Sasol is taking over some of the municipal services in a partnership with us. The municipality is one of the 37 approved to get into ensuring that they ring fence what they have and they are able to pay. But that needs to be coupled with the message of community buy-in. Don't damage your infrastructure. Assist us with illegal connections, averting them, and take care of your property. I don't know
Absolutely.
how many mayors you would have seen trying to cut and terminate services.
Could I ask you
in some
on that,
instances,
Minister?
they are chased out.
And sorry to cut you there, but when I looked at the serial offending municipalities, as it were, I noticed that Free State and Mpumalanga seem to have a disproportionate amount. Is there something, do you think there's something that needs to be looked at, particularly in terms of those provinces? Is there something that the provincial governments may be able to do, as we've seen in Gauteng?
Yes. In fact, if you look into the entire 20 and the relationship that those municipalities have towards dysfunctionality, and remember in dysfunctionality we measure 5-6 areas. We measure stability, we measure admin and governance, we measure service delivery, financial management, local economic development and all that. They've failed almost in most of those boxes. So in Northwest, for example, the province itself is intervening in about 22 municipalities out of their 30. That indicates that quite a bit with regard to maintenance of a fiduciary responsible institution has been left. So we've put also ourselves at national level, municipal improvement packages, where we're putting even experts, loaning them through national office to municipalities. You are unable to set your tariffs, let's get you an expert who could be able to come here for 3 months, put you and give you a good tariff so that the tariff could be equitable to what you are sharing and you will be able to recover the money that you have. It's a basket of what, it's actually a point that Ms. Mukwena touched, that if 109 does not default, we also carry a responsibility of looking at the 20 and thoroughly assess and be truthful. What are the challenges?
Indeed, and let me give Ms. Gladwin-Jones her, I apologize, Ms. Gladwin-Wood, her equitable share of the questions. You had an interesting case study of Mfuleni. What do you think that tells us about this wider problem of the provision of services, but also the financial problems that are related to that?
So I think that broadly speaking, there are two categories of municipalities that have an Eskom problem. The one is where they are unable to collect, or their budget is problematic because, for example, they don't have enough money to provide services to all the citizens. Perhaps they've got massive technical losses. I think Joburg's water technical losses sit at somewhere around 50%. So they have infrastructural and systemic challenges which make it impossible for them to pay. That's one category.
Sure.
There's a second category of municipalities where they are actually, through the provision of electrical services, collecting a lot of that money, and they could be paying it over. Now, this speaks to the point raised by my colleague earlier about ring fencing. So in terms of the electricity legislation, municipalities really are actually meant to sort of run their electricity as a kind of business unit on their own. And if they all did that perfectly, which they don't, it would be easier for the interventions proposed by Kochte and Eskom to come together and to be able to find a solution by attacking the problems which start at the bottom, the cultures of non-payment. But unfortunately, most municipalities don't do that. So that's one problem. But in terms of, sorry, I've just gone absolutely blank.
No problem. We were talking about Mfuleni and it's...
Yes, so Mfuleni in particular is a very interesting case because there's a reported judgment on it. It's a Joburg High Court judgment. Quite a recent judgment. It was this year. And this shows the lengths that Eskom went to try and negotiate and extend lifelines and acknowledgements of debts. And Mfuleni was collecting something like 95% of the money from its sale of electricity, but it simply wasn't paying it over to Eskom. So that's why I think it's important to distinguish between the two categories of municipalities. Some are trying to take they're trying to simply make sure that the taps don't run dry, and they're providing water, the most basic provision of human services to the indigent, and that's why they're not paying their bill. Whereas others are mismanaging. There might be fruitless and wasteful expenditure, which accounts for why they don't have the money. There's holes in their budget, financial mismanagement, dysfunctional problems, and I think those are where you need to start.
Absolutely. We're in conversation with an interesting panel ranging from government to Eskom to legal experts on the question of what is the financial health of Eskom and how does that relate to its ability to provide the service that we all so sorely need in conjunction with our municipalities. When we come back, we're going to inquire into the way forward and how we can get ourselves out of this problem. Stick with us. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're talking the money that is owed to Eskom by municipalities and how that affects you and me. Ms. Gladwin-Wood, we ended off with the case study of Mfuleni, but there was an interesting judgment there which proposed some solutions as to how the municipality can be held accountable without punishing citizens that are actually paying. Could you take us through that as a possible route forward for the future?
Absolutely. So as my colleague has mentioned, Eskom has tried very hard over the years to get court approval to disconnect certain non-paying municipalities. Now, they failed in that regard because of the patent unfairness where I might be paying my bill, my colleague is not, and then I suffer for it, right? So we have a grassroots problem here.
So just to clarify that, Eskom can't just switch services off for everyone because some are paying, some aren't, and they're punished equally.
And that is the Constitutional Court, the highest court in the land's judgment on it. It was a very, very close judgment of 5-4, but that was the decision. And that's put Eskom under a lot of pressure because that was one of its primary techniques. If you're not paying, I cut you off. That's now been taken away from it, which is really quite problematic for Eskom. So Eskom, to its credit, has done a huge amount of work with COCTA as well in trying to find other avenues to be able to assist municipalities, and hence all the collaboration and the debt review program. And what happened in the Mfuleni case was essentially that if you can imagine taking the various points of the proposed debt review, debt write-off program, and converting that into a court judgment, that's almost kind of what happened. So the court laid out a number of steps. They allowed Eskom to basically come in and take over the business of electricity resale in Mfuleni, so that the money went straight to Eskom, and if there was any money owed by Eskom to Mfuleni, it could just pay that little bit over. But it took the responsibility out of the hands of Mfuleni and put the revenue into Eskom's hands. And then there were a lot of other steps in the judgment as well, which aimed at the accountability of the persons who were all involved. But as my colleague pointed out to me in the break, litigation is not the way that government entities, it's not ideal for our courts to be stepping in and telling government entities how they need to run themselves. We have legislation and policies which are put in place to actually provide a more fluid relationship, because cooperation really is the way. So we start there, but if it doesn't work, in the case of Mfuleni, because they just resisted everything that Eskom attempted, you can approach the courts. There is relief there. And government entities, even themselves, should not be afraid to approach the courts. The courts are the final arbiters, and they are there to protect everyone in South Africa.
And what about ratepayers themselves and how that protects them? Do you think that that's a wiser way of protecting ratepayers? And how can ratepayers protect themselves from government trying to switch off their services when they are good paying?
When they're paying.
Yeah.
So one of there's quite a lot of judgments on it, and ratepayers are protected. For example, if Eskom decided that it wanted to turn off a particular municipality. As my colleague referred to earlier, there are provisions in terms of an act called PAJA, which is the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. Basically what it says is that if Eskom has a right to turn off that municipality for whatever reason in terms of its legislation, in terms of its agreements, it can't just go and turn off without notice. It needs to give notice to all the residents in that municipality, and then it needs to give them an opportunity to be able to make representations. Say to me, my business is going to die, 10,000 people are going to be out of pocket. And what that does is it opens the door to collaboration between those residents on the ground and Eskom with the municipality. So the idea behind PAJA and all the court cases which have precluded Eskom from cutting off an entire municipality that's not paying is there to protect the person who does pay, but it's also there to make sure that we can find broader solutions to these systemic problems.
Minister, your thoughts on the way forward, some of the solutions, the Mfuleni judgment, and whether that presents a way forward for government?
I don't think so. But of course, as I said earlier on, we carry a huge responsibility of cooperative governance.
Sure.
So maybe it's the best way is to lead and ensure that, one, there are structures which we set that allows ourselves, the municipality, Eskom, and any other key stakeholder to be in the table and discuss about early warning systems. Because it's one thing as you through the national treasury, through MFMA overseas municipalities, but the interaction between, because once you've missed the second, third current account, the possibility of you recovering is very, very minimal. So it means our monitoring needs to be right up to the point, but mechanisms on how within the grants we could try and find a way of ensuring that we put the municipality to terms to be able to set and settle the debt, or at least pay what they could be able physically to be able to afford, but not shy from assessing the system, including the finances. Where are the money? Because you don't have to wait for the Minister of Finance for cost restraint, for example. We could do it ourselves as municipalities. We will stop buying this, we'll stop doing that in the interest of paying a water board or of paying the water. But the question is, in the many, will there be such even space? I doubt it.
Right.
There wouldn't be such a space for such municipalities. In Mfuleni itself, because there is a relationship, if you don't save as well, people don't pay worse. So what happens is the account is attached now both by Eskom and the Rand Water.
And the service definitely doesn't get delivered.
Definitely doesn't go to anybody, you know.
Ms. Mokoena, could I get your final thoughts just before we wrap up in a minute or so?
Yeah, look, from us, obviously the strategy of, stopping the debt, preventing the debt and reducing it is one of the three, pillars that we are looking at. And I think with the National Treasury, debt relief that it has given to the municipality, we are, hopeful that obviously the municipality will comply with we've got about 27 municipalities now that have been approved and for this debt relief, and we hoping that they will obviously honor their current account, because that's one of the main condition, so that by monitoring them after 12 months, obviously the conditions says that 1/3 of their debt will be actually written off, and obviously the next 12 months, which is 24 months, then 2/3, and then eventually the whole amount is being written off. And one other, so basically we're hoping that would really assist us. But obviously we spoke about the issue of the debt not obviously increasing as well, preventing it. And I think there's a lot of strategies that have been implemented in terms of how do they also manage or their credit control, measures in terms of their customers.
That's where we'll have to leave it.
Yes.
Sorry to cut you, but that's where we'll have to leave it. Ms. Mokoena, thank you very much for joining us. I believe we may have some social media comments that have been offered on the show. Letswapo says, Eskom is part of the problem because from the first month the client doesn't pay, you inquire, then on the second month you take steps against the client, to be precise, but the service delivery is poor even without Eskom problems. Cogta Minister and guests account. And finally, Mabule says electricity business will continue to decline for municipalities due to mainly renewable energy, load shedding, and above inflation tariff increases. Thank you very much for joining us this evening on Unfiltered. Tonight, we've inquired into whether the health of Eskom's finances and municipal finances end up affecting whether you can keep the lights on. And just as we seem to be turning the corner, please, on load shedding, could the finances of Eskom come back to bite us? Well, tonight we've explored that question. Let's continue this conversation on social media at Unfiltered SABC. And be sure to tune in for more unfiltered news, unfiltered views, and unfiltered conversations. Good evening.